Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Soulcast Media event. It is so wonderful to see you all, and thank you for dialing in. We have a very special episode interview today. And before I invite my guest up, I wanted to share a little bit about, what this session is and why I'm so passionate about putting together these sessions for you. So, this is all about teaching you how to level up your communication skills. That's something that I'm passionate about. But a lot of the guests that I invite up, they are expertise in their field. And you all know that today's episode is going to be talking about how do you manage up. When my friend Melody wrote this book, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is a topic that I get asked a lot about because it's probably one of those things that stresses us out because it's not something that we're really taught. I know Melody's going to talk a lot more about this in just a few minutes. But before we dive into that, I want to do a quick intro of who I am. So, my name is Jessica Chen, and I'm the founder and CEO of Soulcast Media, and we are a communications training company. I'm also author of the book Smart, Not Loud: How to Get Noticed at Work for All the Right Reasons. And I wrote that book for folks who I say are very smart, very ambitious, but getting noticed at work, advocating for yourself. Maybe that's not something that you're comfortable with. It certainly wasn't something that I was comfortable with. But through the years of working as a broadcast journalist, that was my background, I learned a lot of communication skills on how do you present yourself? How do you speak up at work? How do you package your messaging so it lands with impact? This book came out not even a year ago. So if you haven't gotten your copy of it, Smart Not Loud, be sure to check it out because it's something that I'm so proud of. So that's a little bit about me, why I'm so passionate about what I do. So let's get started with today's event. I'm thrilled to invite Melody Wilding here. She is an executive coach, a human behavior professor, and the author of her new book, which is Managing Up. So let me bring her up here so we can meet her. Hi, Melody.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so glad for first of all, congratulations on this is your second book now. And I think you're in this world of let's talk about this book and all the amazing learnings from it. How are you feeling with the new book out?
I'm feeling great. I mean, this is the fun part for me. Now you get to talk all about the book and the insights in it. You get to hear from people how they're applying it. And I'm sure you've had the same experience as people go through Smart Not Loud and they say, "Oh, I use this framework in my meeting." And when it makes a difference for them, it feels like all of the late nights and, the hard times trying to get the book just right, it makes it all worth it.
Oh, I totally get it. Those nights where you're on your laptop, your hair's all crazy, you're maybe in your PJs, and it's like in the wee hours of the night, you're like, "Gosh, am I ever gonna get to the finish line here?" Right?
Mhm. That's right, that's right, or is anybody going to like this or find it valuable? Yeah.
Well, it's a very valuable book. And I think before we start diving into the learnings of managing up and how do you manage your manager, which I think is a huge part of this book, I want to understand, why did you write this book? What inspired you to write this book?
Well, you and I talked last when my first book, Trust Yourself, came out, which was a couple of years ago. And a lot has changed since then. When Trust Yourself came out, it was the middle of the pandemic. And what I kept hearing from people again and again was that they felt almost helpless at work. They felt like their future, their relationships, their career trajectory was out of their control. And I'm a big believer in freedom and having personal agency in situations. And so I really saw an opportunity for people to learn these skills to take back control of the dynamics around them. Because something I say in the book, and that really underscores everything, is this idea of you teach people how to treat you in the workplace. And communication, there's nowhere where that's more important, where if you are approaching someone with confidence, with conviction in your message, in your tone, people respond to that. And so the book is really about how do you do that in a way where you may need to do that to someone that has more positional authority than you, whether it is your boss, it's your skip level, it's a project lead, because those power dynamics make it much trickier. You may be more likely to people please, overthink, back down. And so that's really where it came from.
I love that. And I love this notion of, that you actually control how other people treat you. I think sometimes, we let somebody speak to us a certain way. We don't really say anything about it, even though it really bothers us. Someone treats us as very dismissive to us, and we kind of just like let it go. Right.
Mhm.
And maybe the first time you're so taken back, you don't say anything, but you see that it keeps happening. Keeps happening. This person keeps disrespecting you, right? And at a certain point, you're like, wait a second, this has got to stop. Like, I need to let this person know that this is not okay, right? But I think a lot of it does come down to feeling like the confidence to feel that you can speak back, that you can manage up. Because I know with a lot of folks that we work with, there's this very, and I think it's part of a cultural thing, like this idea of, respect for authority, deference, right? And a lot of times people go, well, managing up is just about saying yes, right? Or just letting it be. What's your take on that?
Yes. Usually when people hear managing up, they think sucking up, right? Ingratiating yourself to the people around you, just being a yes person. And that's a very outdated view of managing up because we've seen it depicted that way in TV shows and movies, the person who's like running around behind their boss and just saying, "Sure, whatever you want." And today, just with the complexities we're facing and the fact that you may be working in a matrix environment, the leaders around you also now more than before, they need you to speak truth to power. And so the way I define managing up in the book is really, how do you navigate your relationship with people that have more authority than you? Pretty simple. But the counterintuitive idea is that this is something you do for yourself. This is not something you do primarily for your bosses or your leaders' benefit, which is what we've been taught to believe. Make them look good, make their job easier, which that's a nice side effect of everything we're going to talk about. But this is really about, how do you disagree in a way where you can get some of the input you have on the table and actually have it heard and respected? How do you set boundaries and protect your bandwidth or push back when they dump another project on your plate? How do you get alignment so you know you're working on the right things? So it's really about creating the conditions for you to be successful even when you work with imperfect people that may not always be able to articulate what they want or are under their own pressures and stressors and maybe more snappy than we would like at times.
I love that mindset shift where you're not doing this, you're not managing up for them, you're doing it for yourself, right? And I love, like you just said, it's like you're creating that own agency to control how do you show up in the workplace? How do you tell people the way you expect to be treated yourself? Because I think a lot of times, we just, like I said, we let things be. We let other people dictate how we want things, or how they want things. And we just kind of like acquiesce and we say, sure, we say okay because we want to be well liked, right? So I like that you're defining as it's something that we need to do. It's not even a nice to do, it's a must do, right?
Yes, and I love what you said about acquiescing, or we just sort of we try to be easy and flexible. But there was research I came across in the course of doing writing this book that confirmed something I had seen again and again. But it's always nice to have it be borne out in the research. And it was this idea that if someone doesn't have preferences, oh, I don't know, whatever you want to do, that's fine with me. When someone doesn't have preferences, we get more frustrated with them because it all of a sudden now takes us more cognitive energy to say, well, would you like this or that? And so I think what you're saying is we need to be assertive about what we need at work, right? That's why the subtitle for the book is How to Get What You Need from the People in Charge. We need to be clear about that. We don't need to be heavy handed or rude. We can be thoughtful in the way we say, hey, it would be helpful to get feedback in this sort of manner. And by doing that, we're getting what we want. And we're also telling someone how to get the best out of us. And there's almost no better thing for a manager than make my job mentally less taxing. Tell me how to get the best performance out of you. It becomes a win-win.
I love that, and I love how it's kind of like, you yourself, you wanna give your best too, and in many ways, you managing up is you also letting them know by you kind of creating this environment, I therefore can increase my output. I therefore can perform at a higher level, right? It's not all these, like, little things that's stressing me out and taking me away from the things that matter. It's kinda like, I'm letting you know that if you want me to perform at my best, these are the conditions that I need. And what manager really is going to be like, absolutely not, right? At the end of the day, a good manager wants their employees, the people that they are managing to succeed. You would hope, knock on wood, right? And so if you in many ways present it in that way, like, and not in like an aggressive or, self-centered way, it's more like, hey, I'm trying to do the best I can because I care about this team. I want us to do well. And in order for me to perform at this level, these are some of the conditions that I need, or, whether it's like downtime or no meetings during this block of time, or, hey, I might be a bit slower at responding to emails this week because I'm working on this. I think a lot of times it's setting those expectations, right?
Oh, yes. The more explicit you can be about that, the better. And, I think a lot of people think that will make me look high maintenance, right? That's the fear we have, but the framing of it is so important. And that's what you were saying. I'm sure you're familiar with WIFM, right? WIIFM, what's in it for me? And that's true here, right? So if you're saying, "Oh, I would like bullet points, or I would love questions ahead of our meetings because you may be someone who wants to prepare, your boss is a bit more spontaneous." How can you say it would I would love to have the questions in advance because that means I can make our time together more efficient and more valuable. So you're showing how does this thing I'm asking for actually benefit you and our work in the end. And I think that was important in the framing is it's not just about me, and what I need. It's more about here's how we make it a win-win for both of us.
Exactly. Okay, so let's get into some of like the frameworks in the book. And I think the
Yeah.
first question, well, there's two questions. Well, the first question I want to ask is, and I think it kind of like goes with what the things you talk about is like, how do you set those boundaries, right? How do you actually approach these conversations? And then the other thing is, can you even say no to your manager, right? And I think that's part of managing up. So those are kind of like the two big questions that I'm just dying to know what your take is.
Yes, well, let's if I may just back up a little bit because this is important. So you said the word conversations, and that's a very important element to this book and this approach because it's based around these 10 key conversations to have to manage up effectively and to influence without authority. And I chose to frame it that way because I think when many of us are told you need to manage up more effectively, we need to see you influencing your stakeholders better, we think, well, how? How do I do that? What does that mean? Or we get very piecemeal tips about being proactive and taking initiative, know their priorities. But none of that is very in depth. It usually breaks down when we actually hit the complexities of these situations. And so the 10 conversations framework is an idea to help you, or methodology rather, to make managing up more graspable, something you can actually wrap your head around, but it's also sequential. And so before we even get to the boundaries conversation is one of them, and we can absolutely talk about tactics from that. But there's several conversations that precede that, that have to come before that. And it's things like alignment. How are you getting on the, I mentioned, how are you getting on the same page and you understanding what's the most meaningful, high value work I can be doing? What are the priorities that are important to my boss, the organization? Because if you're not aware of that, you're rowing in the wrong direction, you're not going to get anywhere. So we have alignment, we have styles. I know this is something you talk a lot about, different communication styles. How do you deal with managers that have a different approach than you? Maybe they're more dominant and to the point. You're someone who likes context. How do you identify them and adapt your approach, but also bring up and share your own preferences so you're not lost in the mix. So we have alignment, styles, ownership. How do you convince your leaders to do things that may be outside of your job description or to get on board with an idea? And then we get to boundaries. And why I say that is because when it comes to setting boundaries, we have to have some modicum of trust built up, right? It's very hard to push back if someone doesn't know if we're going to follow through later, right? We need rapport in that relationship to be able to push back. So that sort of zooms out of that framework. Now, when it comes to the boundaries conversation, this is usually, I would say, one of the most stressful ones for people because we're having to walk this very fine line of, I want to be a team player, but I don't want to be seen as a pushover. And so, how do I do that? How do I say no to this person who controls my paycheck, my future, and if, if they tell me to do something, I have to do it, but I physically can't. I have no other time. And so that's some of the struggle people go through. And when it comes to the managing up philosophy in this book, it's more about being a trusted partner or a trusted advisor to your manager versus just acting like a subordinate. The subordinate mindset is about reacting and always being on your back foot, putting yourself in a one down position. The trusted advisor, the partner mindset is more about, I let my manager know it's my responsibility and obligation to surface when we have these conflicts of interest or these risks. And that's what you're doing with the boundaries conversation. So I think that, again, another mindset shift that's important is that actually it's part of my duty to let my manager know when something may be, a timeline may be jeopardized because I have 3 projects on my plate and I may not be able to get to one in time or do it at the level of quality that's expected. Now, when it actually comes, what do you actually say, right? In that moment, what do you actually say? And I always suggest starting with questions first because it buys you some time, frankly. Many of us, when our manager asks us to do something, we go between 2 extremes. On one extreme, we have our people pleasers who are say, "Yes, sure, no problem, I got it," and we figure out how to fit it in. Or we may be under so much stress that we snap back and we say, "I can't believe you're asking me for one more thing. Don't you realize you already gave us 6 other projects the last week?" And we get defensive around it. So asking questions helps you buy yourself some time, and it gives you more information about the request because you may not know on the face of it if it actually could be a great exposure opportunity for you or help you learn a new skill, or you don't know that usually from the outset. So, questions like, can you tell me more a bit about the timeline or what's driving the urgency here? Who else will be roped in on this, or who else will this be visible to? Do you see this being something that's one time, or do you anticipate this becoming an ongoing need or part of my role? That gives you a lot of information where you could either say, "Okay, I'm happy to step in." You could direct someone to somebody else to say, "Actually, this sounds something more like what the operations teams done does than something that would live with us." So, ask questions first. And then in that chapter, I give a couple of different tools you can use for actually pushing back. And these all balance the fact that you do need to have some deference to authority, right? But not total, not total deference. So the first strategy is the trade off approach. And that's where we say, okay, I hear both X and Y are important. What would you like me to deprioritize in order to make space for Y? Or what would you like us to temporarily slow down on to delegate to another team? And the magic of the trade off is you're approaching it more like a problem solving exercise. You are framing the question. So you are saying subtly, both of these are not possible. We have to make a trade off here or a compromise here. And it ultimately puts the decision making power back in the other person's hand. You can make a recommendation to say, well, from where I sit, this is how I would see it's most important for us to prioritize, but you can make the final call here, of course. So that's the first one, the trade-off. And then second, we have the conditional yes, which is you say yes now, but you set a boundary for the future. So you may say, I'm happy to step in because I know this is a important request for the client, but I want to make sure we both know that in the future I may not be able to accommodate a 24-hour turnaround. Or you might say, I would love to sit down after we get through the next 2 weeks and talk about how do we put a process in place for these types of requests moving forward. So it's approaching it as there's can we put a process in place or setting a precedent that if this comes in the future, I may have to push back. All right, I'll pause there.
I was just, like, taking it all in, and there were so many, I called them, like, golden nuggets that you just shared, and I wanna reiterate some of them that really, I felt was very, like, profound, and I think the first one was this whole mindset shift that you said, right? And it was about, you have to take that responsibility in many ways to manage up, like, it's something that you have to do to manage up to create those boundaries with people, but you said that you need trust, right? You need that rapport, and it kinda reminds me of one of the things that I talk about in my book, which is, thinking about so for me, there's a whole chapter where I teach people how to ask for what you want, right? So
Mhm,
this is the idea of asking for what you want. And the way I framed it is, not just necessarily asking, but thinking about have you already built up your credibility jar? I think about it as like a credibility jar. A credibility jar is like, you're doing all the good work. So you're putting coins into this jar. And eventually you got to cash in this jar, right? I mean, you put in all
mhm,
that work. So at this similarly, right? You have to have that trust and rapport before you can push back. And similarly, for me, it's kind of like when you're thinking about asking for what you want, have you done all the good work to feel like you have that good, strong, solid case and foundation, right? The other thing that you said that that kind of like made me smile is, I love this framework of, giving people like the option, right? Okay, so if you want me to do this work, what do you want me to now deprioritize, right?
mhm.
And you're basically, like you said, you're giving them that control. And I was smiling because this is going to sound so silly because it reminds me of just the way I sometimes communicate to my toddler son. And I'll give you the story
Mhm.
because when we're sitting at dinner and I'm like, eat your broccoli, right? Like I'm trying to get him to eat his vegetables. And for any of us here, if you have kids, you understand. Sometimes it's a struggle. Especially because my son is quite a picky eater. So what I've realized is I also have to give him options. So instead of trying to shove this broccoli down his throat, I'll be like, "Okay, Do you want broccoli or do you want cauliflower?
Yes.
You know? And suddenly it becomes so much less forceful and it becomes kind of like, "Ooh, I get to choose? I want the broccoli. Broccoli is what I choose to eat." And then suddenly it becomes an easy kind of like dynamic versus like me being that stressful mom being like, "Eat your damn broccoli," right? So it kind of like obviously it's not necessarily the same, but it's kind of same in the sense where when you give somebody that notion of you get to pick, you get to choose, you get to decide, right? You as a person who's offering this is like you are kind of winning as well, but at least you're making them feel good about it.
Do you know what's so funny? That you are not the first, second, or third person to give that example to me. I have had so many conversations where people will say, "I do that with my kid." I say, "You have to wear you are wearing pants today. Would you like to wear the polka dot or the pink pants?" And it's in psychology, it's called the illusion of control. And that is exactly what's happening. What you were saying is you're creating a sense of agency for the person. This is not manipulative. I want to put that out there. This is not manipulative. This is in service when we're talking about the workplace here. This is in service of protecting your own bandwidth, your team, making sure the work actually gets done on time to the level of quality everyone wants. So I just want to put that out there because I know it can seem like, "Oh, but I'm being Machiavellian about it," or that's a political move. And it's not. It's savvy, it's thoughtful, it's strategic. And human behavior is human behavior, whether we are 2, 22, 42, 62. And so there's a lot of principles like that in the book. Same thing with positive reinforcement, right? Everyone wants to hear what they're doing well. And it's why you say to your kids, great job. You were so kind to someone at school today, right? Because you want to reinforce that behavior. And with your manager, you might say, "Thank you so much for that clear feedback. Now I know exactly what to work on," right? Which reinforces you possibly getting more clear feedback in the future. Yeah.
It's so funny that you said that there's so many people who also brought up the example of communicating with kids because in some ways it really is the same, obviously different environments, but it's kind of like what you said. It's just understanding human behavior, human desire, what motivates people, right? And
Mhm.
so I think us talking about boundaries, all of this applies. So let's talk about like saying no, like something that you just don't wanna do or you don't think is a good use of your time, right? Does it really go back to kinda like the frameworks that you just said, or are there any other tips? And the reason why I'm kinda like doubling
Mhm.
down on this question is because I think for a lot of people who listen to our podcast, this is the hardest thing to do. It's saying no to authority. It is creating boundaries, which we already shared a lot of tips, but it's like, how can somebody do that when they really feel like they don't have the ability or even the
Yeah.
option to say no?
Yeah, well, the trade-off approach and the conditional yes are 2 good ones. Another you can use is saying what instead of saying, "I can't do this," share what you can do. Frame it in the affirmative. So let's say your boss asks you for to get them something in a totally unreasonable timeline. Instead of saying, "I can't do that, that's not possible," you might say, "Okay, so by Friday, I can get you this. I can get you the outline for the deck, not," and what you're omitting there is not the entire deck finished, but "I can get you an outline for the deck. How does that sound?" And so you're leading the charge of this is what I can do. The other person feels like you're being cooperative and giving them something. But again, you're still approaching it with the subtle understanding of this person in power has asked me to do something, but I still have some leverage in how I negotiate it. And sometimes you may need to say, I want to flag some concerns I have about taking this on. And they are 1, 2, and 3, right? And it again, people most bosses, I know there's a lot of talk about toxic bosses, difficult bosses, and there are so many people in those situations. And what I want to say is that at the same time, there's a lot of managers out there who are just good humans who are trying to do their best every day, who are under a lot of pressure and have to deal with tough situations themselves. So, most managers do want you to be successful, even if they're not saying it every every single day, every chance they get. And so if you they also don't know what you have on your plate. And they may not see what's happening at your level or understand some of the complexities or things that you are handling. And so, if you can approach them and say, you might not be aware, but here's everything myself or the team is juggling. And I wanted to flag some concerns I have about taking this other project on. I'm not sure it would be advised or it would be in our best interest to do this. What do you think about that? Right? So it's making it more of a conversation. You can still say this is my perspective and I have concerns here, which is your duty to do because you are closer to the work.
Totally. I love that. And I love how you said, so like, giving the example of like, let's say your manager's like, you need to give me the presentation deck by Friday, right? And deep down, you're like, no way. Like, there's no way I can do that. But you can't say no
Mhm.
directly, right? Because that's going to create that impression that, you're not, getting it done, blah, 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 right? But I love how you're like, instead of saying a direct, like, no, I can't do that, right? Instead, you can say, well, how about I get you an outline by Thursday, right? So
Mhm.
you're still offering something even though it's not like that direct no, and it still creates that impression that you're still doing work. It's just that you're not giving them that exact thing that they need, but you can give them something else and they can be like, "Okay, I get it." Right? So I think similarly, it's offering the different options.
Yeah. And a lot of people will say, well, then my manager starts guilt tripping me or says, well, I thought you were a team player. We're all doubling down now and everybody's working harder. And so it makes you makes tries to make you feel bad about the situation. If that happens, you can literally like turn it around on them. And what I mean by that is if they say, "Oh, I thought you were a team player, Jessica." You might say, "Actually, I am a team player, which is why I care about us being successful. I want to make sure we can actually meet this deadline. And so that's why I'm suggesting we don't take this on or we push this back." So you can, if they're making an assumption about you, you can actually turn that around and say, this is why I'm bringing this up.
I think anytime you link it to saying like, I can't do something because, instead of saying I just don't have enough time, it's just framing as I want to make sure I give you the best deck, or I want to
Yes.
make sure I give you a thorough report, right? Whatever it is, you're letting them know this is kind of like the reason why, and that you want to give them the most high quality product, right? And I
Yes.
think like when you frame it that way, your manager's like, yeah, that's true. I do want to make sure that Jessica's not just throwing me this like half-baked presentation. Like if she's saying that like, I want to make sure I'm giving you the best one, there's something like psychological about this, right? It's just feeling like, oh, okay, yes, that's true, right? You want them to feel like, oh, that's true. And then they'll be like, okay, right? So
Yes. Yeah. And what you're saying in the psychological research, it's called benevolence, which is a fancy term that means, does someone feel like you're for them, that you're on their side, that you have their best interests at heart? It's a fundamental aspect of trust. You mentioned credibility earlier. That's another aspect of trust. Like we have benevolence, credibility, and also integrity. Do you do what you say you're going to do? But benevolence we often overlook. And it's moments like that. Does your manager feel like you're saying no because you have their interests, the organization, the client, everybody else's interests at heart instead of just you're being lazy or you're just refusing to do this. So if you can suggest that, it goes a very long way.
totally. So, I mean, we've been chatting for. I mean, there's been so many questions that and so many points that you share that I think are just so great. But one of the final questions I want to ask, and I like to ask this question is, as you were writing this book, what was like your favorite part of the book? Like, was it a certain chapter? Was it a certain like aha that you realized in writing this book, and why was that your
Yeah.
favorite?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. Well, the boundaries chapter is one of my favorites. So I'm glad we spent so much time on that. I really love the styles conversation. We touched on that a little bit, but there's a framework I share in there called the four C's. And it's based on there's many uh, communication style assessments that are based on the same research of the fact that for the most part our communication styles boil down to being high or low on dominance and sociability. And I just think it is such a helpful model to really not pigeonhole people, but to identify and be able to flex your style for who you're dealing with. I have just seen time and time again when you realize, oh, I am someone who makes decisions a little bit slower. I'm much more people oriented in how I make decisions, how I like the type of language I use. I use warmer language. I may be uh, more expressive in my communication. I'm dealing with someone who is very results oriented, who just wants the bottom line. When you know that, it eliminates so much frustration on your side, on theirs. You stop taking things so personally when they send you just okay in an email and you think, oh my gosh, why do they hate me? You start to, you can put that in context. And so that is one of my favorite chapters just because I feel like it's so useful on a day to day basis.
Oh, that's so funny that you say that because how
Yeah.
many times, and this is the same, how many times have I gotten an email where it was just an okay, and I'm like, "Ooh, did I piss them off?" Like, that was a very short and curt response, but you said it beautifully. It's like a lot of
Yeah.
times it's like it's just their communication style. There's no ill will or, negative intent with that. It's just that's just how they communicate, meaning that when you respond to an email and you say just a brief okay, even though that might not necessarily be your communication style, it's okay for them, right? Because
Yes.
that's how they also, that's how they receive it as well.
That's right.
Um, okay, so one of the last things I want to ask is any final golden nuggets that you would love our listeners, our the people who are watching for them to take away? What's this like one thing that you'd want them to know about managing up?
Well, let's talk about something we didn't touch on at all that I want to make sure we do, which is advancement. Because those are some of the later conversations. We talk about networking, visibility, advancement, money, right? Those are more advanced that some of the earlier conversations we talked about then build up to. And when it comes to advancement, you have to start so much earlier than you think. Because do not wait until your performance review to say, I would like a promotion or I would like to grow my team from 2 to 4 people. It is too late by that point. So you need to make sure that when you have a great win, that you say something like, it was so much fun being able to work on that AI project. And I am really excited that it sounds like we're going to have more projects like that in the future. I would love to be part of that. Right. So you are planting those seeds about what you are interested in, what you want to be brought on board for. So your manager can have that top of mind and it doesn't become an afterthought that you are bringing it up periodically in your one-on-ones. You are contracting around, all right, what do you need to see by the end of this year to feel confident promoting me from manager to director? And when you do that, you're much more in control rather than feeling like your career is just happening to you.
Mm. So important. And I love how you reiterate this because I say this all the time. You know, Oftentimes when you're asking for that one thing, a lot of times you just spring it on somebody is not going to get that immediate yes. And the problem is that a lot of people when they don't get that yes, they think like, "Oh my god, it's such a bad idea," or "Never mind, I'm not going to," they
Yeah.
take it so personally. But I feel like you just have to back up a little bit and think, and this is like usually like the big things like that you care about, whether it's pitching that new project, getting on a new project, asking for that raise, promotion, right? These are kind of like the big asks that you're doing, right? And you have to, like you said, plant the seeds way in advance. And planting the seeds are just like dropping hints in
Yeah.
the most casual conversations so that it's kind of like sitting in their brain, but you're not asking them to take any action. You're not asking them to make any decisions, right? You're just letting them know that this is kind of floating there, and then you can kind of move on with the conversation, right?
Mhm.
So that when the moment is right, it wouldn't be a sudden like, "Whoa, I wasn't expecting that," right?
Yes.
And you mentioned something about, celebrating your wins. That's one of the things I talk about in my book because number one, I don't feel like we do it enough, right? We don't celebrate the amazing work that we're doing. And I also talk about it as it's not about being boastful or being like, "Oh, look at me." It's something you have to do, but it's like framing it in a way as it's a win for you as well as your team, as well as for the
Mhm.
organization, right?
Yes.
So super important. Okay. Melody, how can people find your book? How can they get connected with you? How can they learn more about your work?
The best place to head is to managingup.com. You can get all the details about the book there. And also, if you come, you enter your name, your order confirmation number, you'll get access to a bonus vault of different scripts and worksheets from the book. So people are really loving those.
I love it. And where are you most active on social media?
LinkedIn. Yes, you can find we are both huge fans of LinkedIn, and that's how we first connected. And so, yes, on LinkedIn every day. I always love to hear what resonates with people. So come over, send me a message, let me know. I would love to hear from you.
Well, Melody, thank you so much for spending the time with us. I hope everybody here walked away with some golden nuggets of things that they can apply and implement in the workplace. And like you said, managing up is something that we have to do. It's not, something that we just do or, not do. It's something that is a must do in order for us to, in many ways, create that reputation that we want, right? So, Melody, again, thank you so much. And for those of you who watched, we put on these events, every so often. And if you want to stay notified of like our upcoming episodes or just to see what kind of fun stuff we're working on, there's a QR code here for those who are watching. You can scan that and that'll get you notified of all the events that we have coming up. And if you can't scan it, you just go to the website soulcastmedia.com/events. And that's how we can let you know what kind of fun stuff we have going on. So with that, thank you everybody. And thank you again, Melody.
Thank you.